Welcome to this short presentation on the question of what is happening to inequity. There are two versions of the story. Here's the first version. Some believe that as economies grow globally, inequity will first go up and then it'll drop. Here you can track what economists call the mean log deviation between the typical individual income and the average per capita income. So starting in the 1970s, inequity, in that sense, began to drop. Here's the second version. In this graph, you see the changes in the ratio of the income of the richest 20% countries to that of the poorest 20%. According to these findings, inequity went up. In the 1960s, the richest 20% countries earned 21 times more than the poorest 20% countries. This went up to 121 times more in 2008. You could ask, so what? The costs of living vary in different countries. Well, here you can see that the gap is also growing when incomes are adjusted to differences in purchasing power. Also, it is important to note that these last couple of graphs have shown the gaps between nations. Therefore, the gap between, for instance, a rich European and a poor Bangladeshi is much wider. This graph shows the income gaps both between nations and between classes within nations. There's evidence of inequities between poor and rich classes within low, middle, and high-income countries. So the rear corner of the graph represents the income of the richest 10% of the population of the wealthiest country, the USA, while the scarcely visible nearest corner of the graph represents the income of the poorest 10% of the population of the poorest country, Sierra Leone. Again, you could ask, so what? What is happening to the gap within nations? Is it widening or is it narrowing? Well, the UNDP recently stated that rising income inequity within countries is the norm. For every country where inequity has improved in the past 30 years, in more than 2 it has worsened. So why the different versions? The first version said that inequity is dropping. Now here's how that was calculated. The graph was based on what economists call the mean log deviation, which is represented through this typical bell curve or normal distribution. It assumes that the further away you are from the average, the less people will be in that income bracket. Based on this method, you would track over time what is happening to that arrow in the middle. Now at best this would give you a measure of the inequities within the middle class. It does not say anything about what is happening to the top and bottom, say 20%. This graph does. So here are the two take-home messages. First, inequity measurements conflict. Second, one version is more valid than the other. At best, inequities are perhaps reduced within the middle class, but inequities between the richest and poorest countries and classes are on the rise. Now finally you might ask, so what? It doesn't matter what happens to inequity as long as the extreme poor are lifted out of their poverty. Now to know more about what is happening to that, see my other video. Thank you.